The one who came before the panic. The creature. Not a ghost, not a beast, but a remnant. An entity that drinks life and leaves an absence. It represents the psychological void created when rational explanation fails, turning superstition into documented dread. A confession from a man who witnessed the first spark of the vampiric panic in 1720, long before the documented cases of Plogojowitz and Paole made the word vampire infamous. He tells of a night, a wound, and the 300 years he spent carrying a secret that explains his terrifying longevity. Tonight, we step away from folklore and into confession. This is the personal account known as "I've kept this secret for over 300 years. The vampire." I was 19 years old when I saw what no one else would record. It was 1720, before Europe knew what a vampire was. But I saw it, and what I saw, it remains with me. My name is what I choose it to be today, but then, they called me Ioan. I was a novice scribe, an apprentice to the village elder, set in a fictional, forgotten corner of the Banat, a patch of land perpetually debated between the Ottoman Empire and the Habsburg monarchy, a place of shifting borders and unyielding superstition. We were Serbs, Vlachs, and Hungarians, all equally poor, all equally devout, and all living under the perpetual shadow of the Carpathian Mountains. The village, which I shall not name, nestled in a valley whose mist seemed less like weather and more like a permanent, cold shroud. That winter of 1720 was brutal, even by mountain standards. The snow began in November and did not relent, piling up against the tiny, timber-framed houses. It was a silence broken only by the crackle of burning logs and the constant, rhythmic whisper of the wind trying to penetrate the ill-fitted window shutters. I spent my days copying inventory lists and baptism records for the elder. My hands, cold and ink-stained, were practiced in the discipline of precision, a trait that made me an observant witness, perhaps, but a cursed survivor later. My room was in the attic of the elder's house, directly overlooking the only road that led up to the small, stone church and its attached cemetery. It was a view I knew intimately. The cemetery was dominated by the small, heavy stone mausoleum of the Dragomir family, our local minor nobles, now mostly extinct. The Dragomir crypt was ancient, its iron gate rusted shut, its stone facade perpetually damp and moss-covered. It was the only place in the entire village that felt genuinely dead. It was the night of January 22nd. The moon was a sliver of ice in the black sky, and the air was so cold it burned the lungs. I had stayed up late, struggling to copy a particularly complex legal document by the fading, guttering light of a tallow candle. The only sound was the scratching of my quill. Then, the unnatural silence broke. It was not a sound of the village, no dog bark, no cough from a neighbor. It was a grating, metallic screech that seemed to vibrate in the very timber of the house. I extinguished my candle instantly, a reflex of a cautious mountain boy, and crept to the window, brushing the frost from the glass with my sleeve. What I saw paralyzed me. Down the snowy path, a single figure stood before the Dragomir crypt. It was tall, too tall, or perhaps just unnaturally slender and elongated by the shadows. It wore a heavy, dark coat that seemed to absorb the minimal light. But it wasn't the height that made my heart seize. It was the motion. The figure was not struggling with the rusted iron gate, as a thief might. It was manipulating it with a precise, effortless movement. The heavy chain and ancient lock, which usually required a blacksmith's tools and brute force, were being handled like wet string. I heard a faint, high-pitched snap, the sound of metal breaking under impossible pressure, and the heavy gate swung inward with a groan of protest from the frozen hinges. I was 19, and my initial emotion was curiosity, laced with profound, dizzying disconcertion. Who was this? A professional thief? A ghoul driven mad by grief? The figure entered the crypt. I waited, holding my breath until my lungs ached. The cold pressing against the window felt like a physical weight on my chest. A few minutes later, the figure emerged. It was no longer alone. It was carrying something. A long, heavy object wrapped loosely in dark cloth. It was the size and shape of a human body, but the figure carried it with disturbing ease, cradled against its chest. As it turned, The faint moonlight caught the object, and I saw a flash of pale, almost luminous skin where the cloth had slipped. It was not the skin of a recently deceased body, which would be stiff and gray. This was the porcelain pallor of something preserved, something fresh. The most terrible moment came when the figure paused, right in the center of the path, and seemed to look directly toward my attic window. I knew, rationally, it could not see me through the distortion of the old glass and the deep shadows of my room. But the sensation was one of being scanned, of a chilling, predatory awareness. The head tilted slightly, a movement too slow for a human, too deliberate. And then the figure began to move away, melting back into the shadows and the swirling snow that was beginning to pick up. It walked not with the heavy tread of a man carrying a heavy load, but with a silent, gliding grace, leaving behind only the faintest impression in the freshly fallen powder. I loosed the breath I'd been holding, felt like a lifetime had passed. The cold sweat on my back was instantly freezing. I stood there until the first hint of gray dawn touched the eastern peaks. I checked my diary, the small leather-bound book where I practiced my script. I had written nothing. My memory, so precise for legal texts, was screaming in alarm. Ioan, you saw nothing, but I had. I saw the crypt gate ajar. I saw the broken lock. I saw a grave violated, not by a man, but by a shadow that moved with the logic of ice. I saw it from my window. No one else remembers. No one else was left alive. The days that followed were defined by a fear that had no name. The fear was rational, but the deaths were not. The elder, a practical man named Vasile, was the first to notice the disturbance at the crypt. He found the shattered lock and the tracks, or rather, the lack of them. The ground was disturbed, but there were no distinct footprints, only long, shallow depressions, as if the heavy snow had been compressed by something vast and flat, but not weighted like a man. Vasile assumed it was a bear, roused too early, though bears do not open iron gates. The first death came 3 nights later. Old man Petru, the tanner. He was found in his bed, looking utterly serene. He had no marks of struggle, no wounds, no blood spilled on his linen sheets. But his face was waxen, his lips pale blue, and his skin was cold, far colder than the usual rigor mortis. He looked, Vasile observed, like a fruit that had been drained of its moisture, leaving behind only the husk. I went to his wake. The smell of the crowded room was of stale bread and fear. I looked at Petru's body. He was empty. The plumpness was gone, replaced by a strange, papery dryness. The second death followed 3 nights after that. Maria, the baker's daughter, a girl barely 15. She had been perfectly healthy the day before, kneading dough and laughing. Her father found her lifeless, exactly like Petru, peaceful, pale, and unnaturally cold. This pattern, the sequence, was what struck me hardest. It was too fast for disease, too quiet for bandits, and too specific for animals. The deaths were happening in silence. The silent blood loss. My initial disconcertion sharpened into rational fear. I started keeping a second journal, hidden beneath the floorboards of my attic room. In meticulous, tiny script, I documented everything. January 25th. Petru. Body temperature below 0. No blood. No sign of struggle. Died in sleep. January 28th. Maria. Identical circumstances. Found clutching a rosary. February 1st. The widow Ilinka. Found sitting upright in her chair, eyes wide. Her mirror was smashed. I began to see the logic of the horror, even as the villagers descended into denial and superstitious frenzy. The priest spoke of the devil. The local healers blamed strigoi, ancient evil spirits, and prescribed garlic and red thread. But the garlic was useless. The deaths continued, always 3 days apart, always without witness, always with the same disturbing stillness. The authorities, the imperial troops stationed an hour's ride away, arrived in February. They were men of logic and gunpowder. They mocked the villagers' fear of strigoi. They postulated a serial killer, a throat slitter perhaps. But how could a killer leave no blood? How could a body be so utterly drained without leaving a single spot on the sheets? The soldiers could not explain it. and their refusal to believe in the horror only amplified my own chilling certainty. I found myself constantly looking at the Dragomir crypt. The broken gate remained, a dark, gaping mouth. The figure I had seen had carried away one body, but the deaths were mounting. Was it taking more? Were these new victims being consumed slowly? I began to patrol the village myself after dark, moving like a thief in the deep shadows. I carried an old, dull hunting knife, useless, but comforting. I heard things. The sighing of the wind, the settling of the frost, the frantic, muffled prayers of the people who knew they might be next. My denial was completely eroded. I knew the creature was hunting, and I knew it was moving with a terrible, silent efficiency. I started to map the deaths, trying to find a pattern. They were not related by family, by wealth, or by piety. The only connection was the time between them, roughly 72 hours. The psychological toll was overwhelming. Sleep became impossible. The moment I closed my eyes, I saw the unnaturally tall figure, its slow, tilting head, and the cold, inhuman awareness I felt pointed directly at me. I was 19, responsible for copying the official records, yet I was secretly tracking a spectral killer that officialdom refused to acknowledge. I was beginning to realize that the most terrifying thing was not the creature itself, but the silence that surrounded its actions. No screams, no struggle, no evidence. It was an erasure, a silent wiping away of life. This creature was not loud or violent. It was precise and utterly, horrifyingly quiet. I was becoming the village's last, terrified, and solitary eye. The next death was predicted to fall on the night of February 14th. A night of bitter, torrential rain that had followed a quick thaw. The kind of black, chaotic weather that swallows all sound. The forecast was for a full-blown blizzard to hit by dawn. I was no longer observing. I was baiting, driven by a desperate, fevered need to break the cycle. I had convinced myself that if I positioned myself near the last known victim's house, Mikhail the Cooper, I might interrupt the pattern. It was madness. My body was shaking uncontrollably, not just from the bone-deep cold, but from sheer terror. The rain was turning to icy sleet, stinging my exposed skin. I was huddled beneath the eave of the Cooper's shed, the dull knife clutched so tightly my knuckles were white and aching. The moment the presence arrived, the world went silent again. The rain did not stop, the wind did not cease, but the sound of them vanished. It was a sensory void, a pocket of anti-noise that swallowed every external stimuli. My ears were roaring, but I could hear nothing outside my own skull. I stood at the edge of the small, frozen garden. It was the same figure, tall, draped in what looked like heavy, outdated noble attire. I could see it more clearly now, and the clarity was worse than the shadow. The face was pale, impossibly smooth, and utterly devoid of expression, like a marble mask left too long in the rain. The eyes, when they briefly caught the faint, diffused light from a crack in Mikhail's shutter, were not red or glowing, but vast, black, and perfectly still, the eyes of deep water. The creature was moving toward the Cooper's back door. It was then, in a moment of pure, panicked reflex, that I did the stupidest thing a 19-year-old apprentice scribe could do. I moved. I tried to crawl backward, away from the shed, to bolt. The noise I made, a small scraping sound of my cheap leather boot on the wet flagstones, was infinitesimal. Yet in that zone of absolute silence, it sounded like a thunderclap. The creature stopped. The head did not turn. The entire torso rotated slowly, like a statue turning on its base, until the vast, black eyes were fixed on the shadow where I hid. Trauma, confusion. This was not a fight. This was being hunted by something that possessed both immense age and mechanical precision. I froze, locked in the shadow. The creature began to walk toward me. It was not running, yet it covered the ground with a horrifying speed, its feet seeming barely to touch the wet earth. I didn't think, I just acted. I scrambled to my feet, yelling a choked, useless cry, and attempted to run across the muddy yard toward the darkness of the nearby wood. I did not make it 5 steps. There was a sudden, incredible pressure on the back of my leg, a force that struck me not with violence, but with surgical efficiency. I didn't feel teeth, claws, or a blade, but rather a crushing, blinding clamp. The force was so immense it didn't feel like tissue tearing, but bone collapsing. I fell, screaming, the sound muffled and strangled in the unnatural silence of the creature's presence. I remember two sensations: the smell of the creature's coat, a damp, ancient scent of cold stone and earth, like a tomb newly opened, and the cold that emanated from its touch. It was not the cold of winter. It was the cold of non-life, a temperature that seemed to suck the warmth directly out of my blood vessels. I don't remember how I escaped. The next moments are a pure, chaotic blank, a merciful failure of my mind to record the terror. Did someone else intervene? Did the imminent blizzard frighten it away? Did it simply decide I was not the prey it sought? All I know is that I woke up hours later, hidden under a pile of discarded lumber at the wood's edge, and the wound was there. It was a deep puncture on my lower left calf, a ragged hole that felt like a hot iron brand. But the bleeding was negligible. The edges of the wound were black, cauterized not by heat, but by that impossible, sucking cold. The most terrifying detail was what I found beside me. The useless, dull hunting knife, broken clean in half, not at the center, but twisted at the hilt, felt like a warning. My leg pulsed with a searing, freezing pain. I was alive. I had survived an encounter that had killed every other person it had touched. I only know I woke up, and the wound was there. It never truly left. It was a constant, throbbing, cold reminder of the night I met the silent hunter. The village disappeared. Not overnight, but over the next decade. The deaths continued sporadically. The fear never dissipated. And the economic hardship of the region, combined with the inexplicable sickness, drove families away. They went to Bucharest, to Budapest, seeking work, seeking safety, seeking logic. By 1730, my town was an echo, a collection of rotting timbers and forgotten names. But I remained. The wound on my leg never healed. Not in the way a cut closes and scars. The tissue knitted, yes, but beneath the surface, it remained cold, hard, and perpetually, faintly aching. It was a cold spot on my flesh, a tiny, eternal pocket of winter, and I did not age. I watched the sun rise on my 20th year, then my 30th, then my 50th. My skin remained smooth, my hair thick and dark, my eyes clear. I tried everything. I moved to the cities. I joined the Imperial Army, seeking a death that would stick. I fought in wars that were loud and bloody, yet somehow I always survived, always without a scratch, except for that single unyielding wound on my leg. My emotion was pure solitude, resignation. I was an observer outside the flow of human time. I saw the reports of the panic begin. I was in Vienna in 1725, working as a clerk under a false name, when I first read the documents circulating from the Imperial Command. The report on Peter Plogojowitz of Kisilova. I remember the chill that was not from the Viennese winter. The report described how Plogojowitz, after his death, was believed to have returned, causing 9 deaths in his village. The report described the exhumation, the body found fresh, with blood on his mouth, and the necessary act of staking him. 5 years later, in 1726, I was in Prague when the Paole case exploded into the European consciousness, Arnold Paole of Meduegna. Again, the exhumations, the fresh bodies, the blood. It was a contagion of fear, a wildfire of superstition now backed by official documentation. I kept silent. How could I explain that I had seen it 5 years earlier? That the reality they were discovering, that undead, draining presence, I had experienced in the silent terror of a forgotten village in 1720? I saw generations die. My own children, whom I loved and then left for their own safety, grew old and passed away. I changed names like I changed shirts. I learned to blend, to be forgettable, to cultivate the strange, detached patience of something that no longer belonged to the clock. 1800s. The scent of the city changed. The thick, acrid smell of coal smoke replaced the clean scent of wood fire smoke. The world became louder. The thundering rhythm of the first steam engines felt like a physical assault on my 18th century nerves. I had to learn to move faster, talk quicker, and understand the logic of industry, which was a horror all its own. The sheer volume of people, the crush of humanity, became the greatest danger, as I had to constantly guard against recognition. In the 1900s, the shift from gaslight to electric light was the most disorienting. The sharp, cold, immediate glare of the electric bulb revealed too much. It made the darkness seem smaller, less protective. I learned to live only in the deep shadows of libraries and archives, places where old paper and forgotten knowledge smelled comfortingly of the past. The world wars were not eras of panic for me, but eras of opportunity. The chaos allowed me to shed my identity and reappear decades younger, untouched by the slaughter. 2000s. The speed of information is a constant threat. The casual use of cameras, the ability to record and document instantly, forces me into perpetual motion. The world is too bright, too well-mapped, too connected. My home is now a series of rental rooms in enormous cities, always at the edge of the internet's reach. I have traded the cold of a Transylvanian winter for the cold of perpetual anonymity. I watched generations die, change borders, but I remained here. The weight of centuries is not the weight of memory. It is the weight of irrelevance. To love is to risk revealing the secret, and so I stopped loving deeply. To settle is to invite recognition, and so I never settled. I am a living relic, a silent testament to a truth that history only recorded in fragmented whispers years after the fact. I am not happy. I am not satisfied. I am simply present, carried along by a current that seems to have no end, with the cold, unhealing scar on my leg a constant, quiet reminder of the night I survived the thing that should have killed me. My survival was not luck. It was an investment. Now 3 centuries have passed. I am weary, but the deep, existential weariness does not translate into physical fatigue. I maintain the outward appearance of a man in his late 20s, handsome in a perpetually pale, quiet way. I look at my reflection, a face I have worn for so long it feels like a mask, and I feel a profound sense of peace, an acceptance that has replaced the terror. I have decided to tell this story now not for catharsis, but as a final attempt to document the true beginning, the beginning before the beginning. I have seen the legends change. The creature I encountered in 1720 was not the aristocratic count of Victorian literature, nor the theatrical monster of modern cinema. It was quiet, cold, and efficient, a force of nature dressed in the forgotten clothes of a noble. My wound, the deep puncture on my calf, never required stitches, yet it never truly closed. It remains a spot of pale, purplish skin, always slightly cooler to the touch than the rest of my body. It is painless now, but I can feel a faint, crystalline pressure beneath it, as if a droplet of ice is lodged permanently against the bone. For 3 centuries, I convinced myself I was merely cursed with extraordinary longevity, perhaps a quirk of my genetic line, or a rare side effect of the trauma. But I know better now. I went years without checking the one thing that should have provided certainty. I avoided mirrors for decades, not out of superstition, but out of a desperate, willful negation of the truth. When I finally forced myself to look, not at my face, which is clear and solid, but at the full length of my body in the silvery depths of an antique French looking-glass in a hotel room in Paris, I saw everything but myself. I saw the room behind me, the peeling wallpaper, the street lamp outside the window. I saw the empty space where my full reflection should have been, blocked only by the cold, pale white of my shirt and trousers. I am not missing. I am not transparent. But the light, the subtle way it should catch the flesh and the soul, seems to pass through me, refracting the reality behind me instead of reflecting the reality of me. It is not an illusion of light, but a fundamental failure of physics. The wound in my leg never healed, and when I saw myself in the mirror, I understood why I am still alive to tell this. I am telling this now because the silence is heavier than the secret. I survived the encounter with the first documented undead horror in Europe, not through strength or cunning, but because, in that brutal moment, it gave me a piece of itself. It left me with its cold, its stain, its impossible longevity. Was I bitten? Yes. Did I convert? The centuries answer that. I am not the hunter. I am the shadow of the witness, a man who has become the thing he feared most, a secret that refuses to die. I have spent the last few centuries refining the tone of this voice, calm, almost weary, as if the concept of time no longer applies to me. And perhaps it doesn't. If you believe me, then this is not just a story of a long-ago tragedy. It is the root of the terror, the moment the true, cold nature of the entity was first recorded, in a private journal that I still possess. I am left with only one question, one I ask myself every time I wake up to another dawn I did not earn. Was my survival an accident, or was it a deliberate infection? Did it wound me to silence me, or did it wound me to leave a replacement? I don't offer you a clean ending. I offer you only this confession. I am the last living witness of a village that vanished, and I remain, trapped in the body of a 19-year-old scribe, a silent monument to the year 1720, forever carrying the cold, unhealing reminder of the night I should have died. Now that you've heard my story, you have to wonder, is this a historical testimony, a warning, or perhaps, and this is the part that chills me most, is this just the very beginning of a much longer, much colder story?
In the perfect